Today we're going to be going over the average height and weight for high school players based on position. The first position we're going to discuss, you guys, is quarterback. So honestly though, with quarterbacks, you have to understand that QB is one of those positions that's very skill oriented. There's a lot more that goes into the quarterback position. Honestly, a lot more that goes into every football position than just height and weight. The reason why I discuss these averages with you is so you know that, hey, maybe I'm a little bit undersized. I need to add certain elements to my game to be able to compete with these guys who are, 6'2" plus, these absolute tree dudes. That's the way it is, guys. If you're undersized, you have to play the game differently. So if you are undersized, you have to work on your, pocket movement, being able to buy some time, create throwing windows, having a quick release, being able to read a defense, because you can't sit there in the pocket because you ain't gonna be able to see, right? So I would say the average for a high school QB would be 5'11" and then 175 pounds. I think that's fair. I think if you're above that 5'11", 6 foot or above, I think you're in a pretty good place. If you're below 5'11", it's not the end of the world. You just have to focus on those things like we mentioned. Now we're gonna talk about that for every single position, you guys. For receivers, DBs, running backs, linebackers, we're gonna talk about if you are undersized, what can you do to make up for that? And that's what we'll be discussing next. Before we get into the average height and weight for receivers, DBs, running backs, linebackers, O-line, D-line, if you are a quarterback or a wide receiver, fellas, and you would like to train with myself and my staff of coaches this offseason, we're gonna be traveling out to 15 different cities across the entire US for 2-day long QB and wide receiver camps. So guys, check out that very first link in the description below if you're interested and you would like to sign up. We're gonna be coming out to San Francisco, California. That camp is completely sold out, but then we'll be heading out to Orlando, Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, Charlotte, North Carolina, Austin, Texas. All those camps that I just listed have about 3 spots left remaining. And then we'll be coming out to Las Vegas, Nevada, Seattle, Washington, Chicago, Illinois, Newark, New Jersey, Birmingham, Alabama, Houston, Texas, Boston, Massachusetts, Columbus, Ohio, Boise, Idaho, and finishing off our tour in Los Angeles, California. So guys, you want some more information? Again, very first link in that description below. We'd love to have you there. Now let's talk about receivers and DBs. So this is gonna be kind of a wider range because for receivers, obviously you have slot wide receivers, and slot receivers are generally on the shorter side of things, you guys, which is totally fine. But in high school, I would say probably anywhere from 5'8" to 5'11", and then 165 pounds. Now, what if you're not at that range? What if you're a slot wide receiver and you're 5'7"? What if you're an outside wide receiver and you're 5'9", right? You're undersized. Totally okay, totally fine, but some things that you gotta work on as a receiver first is probably going to be your speed. If you're short and slow, that's a pretty tough sell to be able to have you play at the next level or play at any level. As against DBs, they're insanely fast, fastest players on the field generally. So you gotta have some speed, gotta have some quickness, then you also gotta have great hands, and you also gotta have great football IQ, knowing how to set up routes, knowing how to work defenders. That's what I would try to emphasize in the offseason. Now, DBs. I'm not a defensive guy, I never pretend to be a defensive expert, but what I will say is if you're undersized, you gotta have great technique. Getting with a DB trainer to work on your technique, your footwork, makes it very, very tough for a wide receiver to at least separate on you. Then all you gotta really worry about is the ball being in the air or a jump ball if you're undersized. But again, great technique is what will make up for a lack of size at the DB position. Let's talk about running backs and linebackers. I would say anywhere from 5'10" to probably 185 pounds. That's generally what it is. They're around the same size as maybe a taller wide receiver or a quarterback, but they obviously weigh a little bit more. Now for running backs and linebackers, if you are undersized, I think something that you could work on is obviously your lateral change of direction. Running backs are always constantly having to cut laterally. Linebackers are always having to change direction laterally. So that's something you can work on. General, just agility is important. But also if you're not 185 pounds or maybe you're undersized, I would really generally think about putting on some more weight in the off season. Trying to stay in a calorie surplus, trying to lift a little bit heavier in the gym. Doing all of those things will help you at least play at that position, because generally linebackers, running backs, there's contact every position. So you can't be thin and while you're still undersized or short. So those are the things that running backs and linebackers can do to separate themselves. Now let's talk about tight ends, you guys. So tight ends, I would probably say the average size, and this might be shooting high, but the thing about tight ends is the best athletes on the field by far, just based on their size and based on their athleticism. So I would say probably 6'2" and 200 pounds. That's generally what I would say for, a high school tight end who maybe has a shot at playing at the next level. Now, if you're a tight end and you're undersized, maybe you're 6 foot, maybe you're 185 pounds, whatever, I would recommend working on your route running. I think tight ends nowadays who can't run routes are maybe not the biggest asset to the team. Work on your run blocking, and then obviously I would work on your speed. If you could work on those 3 things, I think that will make up for a lack of size, especially at that tight end spot. Now let's talk about offensive line and defensive line. So I would say probably the average size is going to be anywhere from, like, 6'2" to 6'3", and then like 225 pounds, maybe a little bit above that. Now again, obviously look at me, I'm not an offensive line or defensive line expert, but I would say if you're an offensive lineman and you lack size, technique is going to be one of those things that will help you stand out, I guess, amongst the bigger players. And if you're a defensive lineman, obviously your speed, agility, and quickness can help you really stand out. Because like you see it every year at the NFL Combine, defensive linemen get faster and faster. They run a better 40 time every single year. So that's what I would ultimately work on the defensive side of things and really hone in on your technique on the offensive side of things.